Another day, another dumb gun control take for Wubba Bubba to cover. The perpetrators this time is the website Rational Wiki. A name you don't really hear a lot anymore. Originally meant to make fun of Conservapedia, it just became less and less of a joke and just became the yin of Conservapedia's yang. They have a wide range of articles that cover just about any modern political issue, including gun control. And boy, when you read it from beginning to end, it just exposes their lack of knowledge of the topic at hand with surface level gun control arguments that you expect from your in-laws. I like to keep this video on the shorter side, so I'm going to keep some of my rebuttals to this article brief. If you hope to watch a longer rebuttal to a wider range of gun control opinions, I suggest my gun control iceberg video from a year ago. In legal terms, gun control refers to limiting access, carrying rights, or use of firearms by the general public. Access limitations consist of completely banning the sale of possession of some types of firearms, such as sawn-off shotguns, bazookas, nuclear bazookas. Okay, first paragraph in and you're already inferring the "what about nukes" argument. But I'll let this slide just because I have a hunch this argument will fully appear later on. And also regulating who is permitted to obtain firearms in general. For instance, preventing convicted felons from owning firearms. But oddly enough, not suspected. Notice the words convicted and suspected are used right before each of their respective identities. Just banning suspected bad guys is such a terrible idea. You don't even need to be convicted of a crime to be put on this list. This could be weaponized so easily. It's easier to get on the no-fly list than to be banned from owning a gun. It shouldn't be easy at all to get on this list either. You already have innocent people mixed up with the feds because of the shady ass criteria that isn't openly shared. Are they actually insinuating suspected bad guys, not convicted ones, shouldn't own guns? Already off to a great start. The article starts to deep dive a little bit into right to carry laws, but I can already tell that whatever studies they show aged like milk because of the Bruin decision that ruled the right of carrying a gun outside of the house is protected under the Second Amendment. The ruling forced several anti-gun counties and states to make their CCW permits shall issue instead of may issue, which increased the amount of CCW applicants and having no noticeable uptick in crime whatsoever, despite pleas from gun control groups that the Bruin decision would lead to a crime wave. Even if I agreed with the Stanford meta-analysis that they show off in this article that right to carry legislation increases very specific crime stats, reversing right to carry and constitutional carry is effectively telling citizens that they aren't part of the privileged class to be able to carry a gun in public for self-defense. In 2012 alone, 190,000 firearms were reported lost or stolen in the United States, with Texas leading at 10% of all incidents. Oh my god, there's just so much wrong with this one sentence. First of all, you're admitting the background check system didn't work because, you know, criminals don't follow the law. Secondly, I did a little math with your own stat by using total estimated guns in the United States as a dividend, and about 1 in 1,800 firearms in that year were stolen. You have a greater chance of your car being stolen than a criminal robbing your gun collection. So don't let them guilt you into thinking that you're an overglorified loot llama for criminals. And thirdly, if you agree with the assertion more guns are bad, it means you want to reduce the amount of guns in civilian circulation. Just going to tell you, good luck with that one. Moving on, the article then proceeds to dip a little into the birth of the assault weapons ban, and it just reads like a typical wiki page. And then out of the blue, I'm thrown this gem of a paragraph. Jody Heiss, Baptist Reverend and the 2014 winner of the Republican nomination for Congress in Georgia's 10th Congressional District, has proposed essentially removing all gun laws and allowing private ownership of bazookas and any weapon that our government and law enforcement possesses. Nuclear bombs for billionaires, anyone? Comparing indiscriminate weapons that are near unobtainable like nuclear bombs to SBRs, short-barreled shotguns, machine guns, and other bearable arms is really dumb. All this serves is to gaslight people into thinking it's ridiculous to be adequately armed. Personally, if any government is allowed to procure nuclear weapons, then give me a Davy Crockett.
Remember the Alamo.
but this is ignoring the hurdles of obtaining one, maintaining it, insuring it, etc. And the fact it's very hard to, use it in an actual self-defense scenario unless your private property is as big as a state. So yeah, probably not realistic at all to procure one, even if you're a billionaire. I'd prefer that all the countries in the world don't have them, but just like gun control, the genie is out of the bottle. The article proceeds to dive into various research findings around gun legislation, which does attempt to be non-partial, but it's obvious which side they skew. Studies on firearms and ammunition bans have been inconsistent. Certain studies indicated decreases in violence associated with bans, while others indicated increases. One meta-analysis from 2015 argued that it must be tentatively concluded that higher gun ownership rates do not cause higher crime rates, including homicide rates. Another one from the same year, however, concluded the weaknesses in US federal firearm policies are well documented and result in many high-risk individuals having access to and using firearms to commit violent crimes. When I think of high risk, I think of people who are already convicted felons or mentally adjudicated, and the laws on the books already say they can't legally own a firearm. Side note, these studies they constantly link to are paywalled, so it's kinda hard to gauge what exactly these studies count as being high risk. And another one from 2017 claimed that evidence from 130 studies in 10 countries suggests that in certain nations the simultaneous implementation of laws targeting multiple firearm restrictions is associated with reductions in firearm deaths. Yes, restricting a civilian's right to keep and bear arms reduces the rate of deaths from that weapon. So the human race just chooses a different weapon and the rates of deaths increase with that choice instead. It's slightly easier to disarm a population when guns haven't been a core part of the country's history, or if the ownership rate is low. But once again, good luck doing this in the United States. Each passing year, you're seeing more and more DIY guns in restrictive countries, so it's just a matter of time before your gun laws only restrict the rights of citizens to bear arms. Laws restricting the purchase of and access to firearms, examples, background checks, and safer storage, are also associated with lower rates of intimate partner homicides, and firearm unintentional deaths in children respectively. Okay, if someone is planning on yeeting their spouse, a gun safe isn't going to stop them from achieving it, let alone them planning it. The unintentional deaths with firearms is tragic, but can be completely negated if you actually explain gun safety with your family. I agree with keeping guns cozy and safe while unintended, but it should be up to the individual to dictate when it's appropriate time to do this, not some nanny state that follows black and white laws with no nuance. The research behind the self-defense aspect of owning a gun is not convincing. A 2015 study from David Hemene of Harvard University researched national crime victimization survey data on about 14,000 people, showing that the legitimate self-defense cases occur statistically rarely in less than 1% of the population surveyed. I will just flat out admit I don't trust one thing this guy says at all, since he perceives self-defense with any gun as wimp behavior. Don't believe me? Let me just read a quote from the man himself. Instead of it being the mark of a real man that you can shoot anybody at 50 feet and kill them with a gun, the mark of a real man is that you would never do anything like that. The gun is a great equalizer because it makes wimps as dangerous as people who really have skill and bravery. So I'd like to have this notion that anyone using a gun is a wuss. They aren't anybody to be looked up to. They're somebody to look down at because they couldn't defend themselves or couldn't protect others without using a gun.
What a bitch.
Getting back on topic, defensive gun use isn't really a stat set in stone, as a law is unreported, but conservative estimates range around 60,000 all the way up to 2.5 million annually. I believe it swings towards the larger number, but it doesn't matter either way. You have a right to self-defense, and gun owners would rather have it and not need it than to need it and not have it. Even officers from big cities, despite being exposed to far more criminals, report rarely having to use a gun. A Pew Research Center survey conducted by the National Police Research Platform reported that out of 7,917 officers from 54 departments with 100 or more officers, only 27% have fired a weapon on duty. Here's the thing, you don't even need to fire your gun to stop a threat. The mere presence of a firearm is a great equalizer. That's why a lot of criminals follow officers' commands without a shot ever being fired. This study also doesn't include rural or small town police departments, so it just makes this study rather incomplete and doesn't fully grasp of how many officers use their gun as a deterrent against a criminal. There is an association between US states with less restrictive gun laws and higher homicide rates. Stronger gun laws doesn't really correlate to reduced homicide rates, as states like Idaho, Montana, Wyoming all have high ownership of firearms yet are below the homicide rate of the nation. It more tends to correlate to gang violence and socioeconomic reasons of a certain demographic in that group, and I'm just going to leave it at that because this part of the debate is above my pay grade. Australia enacted strict gun laws and a nationwide buyback program following a mass shooting. Since then, mass shootings in Australia have essentially ended. The thing is, the buyback that Australia did could never be enacted in America with just the sheer number of guns in the country already. Plus, buybacks only target law-abiding citizens. Why would criminals ever give up their guns? A one-time Target gift card isn't worth it. There is a convincing link between gun availability and gun suicide. I mean, yeah, just like having bridges or sky rises in the area increases the rate of someone to take that route. Most who do want to do the unthinkable usually will find the means to do it no matter what. That's why you still see countries in Asia with high self-inflicted homicide rates, despite having very few guns in civilian circulation. Unsurprisingly, the NRA doesn't like research findings. They called it junk science and encouraged readers of American Rifleman to protest against the CDC for funding such research. Sorry, gun violence isn't a disease or a public health epidemic, and treating gun owners like a virus that needs to be cured is dumb. I personally find it hard-pressed that if they ever resume studies, they will show data to just about everything but self-defense with a firearm. It could always be worse, but not much worse. In 2024, the nonprofit Commonwealth Fund analyzed deaths from gun violence in countries as well as individual US states. They found that, among other things, several US states had significantly higher violent deaths than Haiti, which at the time had no effective national government since the assassination of President Jovenel Moise in 2021. The state governments of Mississippi, Alabama, New Mexico, Missouri, Alaska, Wyoming, Kentucky, Indiana, Colorado, Idaho, North Dakota being on the list of shame. This is the problem with this article, but more apparent. They sling so many studies that they don't even think how dumb their argument sounds. Firstly, you openly admit Haiti at the time had no effective government, so I'm just going to go out on a limb in saying that crimes including deaths are heavily underreported in an admittedly anarchist wasteland. Secondly, notice they use the word violent deaths, not the homicide rate or even violent crimes, a common sleight of hand trick used by gun controllers to make it out like pro-gun states like Idaho are more dangerous to other states or countries with stricter measures. So if you actually compare the meaningful stats that somehow come out of a country that lacks a government, you find out these comparisons are full of shit. Okay, this is the last section of the article where they refute multiple pro-gun talking points, and this was going to be a longer segment of the video, but I came to the conclusion that whatever the author has to say doesn't warrant any response from me. For starters, they can't even get the definition of the Second Amendment right. But do you really want to know what made my jaw drop? The author, verbatim, in another rebuttal section, says the Second Amendment has no legal bearing on owning firearms. What are you even talking about? The right of individual gun ownership has been covered under the Second Amendment since the founding of this country, with multiple court decisions throughout the years reaffirming it. How can you be taken seriously when you say the most brain-dead shit like this? You guys are not just clowns, you're the entire circus. If you guys want to debunk the rest of this guy's surface level takes, by all means go right ahead in the comments. I'm personally not going to waste any more time with someone who actually doesn't understand the Bill of Rights. Thank you for tuning into this bite-sized video. Really do appreciate the support. And until next time, this is Wubba Bubba signing off again.